Hello and welcome to the Brew Hoop Podcast, episode 54. To those of you listening via the podcast, thanks for listening. To those of you who are on the live stream, thanks for bearing with us as we dealt with some technical difficulties, but we are live now. I'm going to avoid playing the intro song this week over the mic because it sounded like absolute crap last week. So we're going to try and retain some level of audio fidelity for the podcast listeners as well. But we're in today. I'm joined as per usual by Riley Feldman and Kyle Carr. Fellas, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I quarantine week 2, much the same as quarantine week 1. The weather's not been great in Minneapolis, so I haven't even had a chance to go out onto various streets to congregate with everybody and hug all my strangers out on the streets. So that's been pretty good overall. But otherwise, nothing too crazy here. Nobody that I know personally have been infected yet, but I'm waiting for the news to break. So yeah, that's what's going on up here.
Yeah, I was gonna say quarantine week 2 was pretty similar to week 1, except I had more kind of like video conferences and meetings, which only meant my internet could not handle the capabilities, which has only frustrated me. And Charter not being of use of at all. So otherwise, yeah, the weather's been kind of crappy here. I think there was like one day, it was like Friday, where it was like slightly like bare, like you could see the sun like kind of crack through every once in a while, but that was it. Otherwise, it's been raining today and yesterday, and it's been cold all the time. So, yeah, kind of hard for me to enjoy anything at the moment besides sitting in my house.
Well, thankfully, that's about all we can do is sit in our home. So that's a good timing for that. Yeah, it's been pretty gloomy out here in Philly as well. So, and it's not like that all the time. There is sun out here. So it's been quarantine is pretty much the same as you guys, dealing with video conferencing issues, dealing with internet issues, but staying inside, making the most of it. But what we are going to talk about today is talking a little bit about, since the state of the season is obviously still up in the air, we're going to sort of act and do a brief in memoriam for the season up to this point, talk a little bit about our highlights, lowlights, what went as we thought it would, what didn't. So, and obviously for anyone watching on the live stream, feel free to pipe in with your highlights or any questions you might have as we go along. But let's start with you, Riley. Did you have any, like, just to get us off on some optimistic foot, any like big highlights that really stuck out to you from this season so far?
So I ended up writing about 3 things for everything except for the what I was right about, because I had difficulty remembering what I had guessed and if I was right about anything, which is appropriate, I think. The 3 things that kind of jumped out to me, and they'll probably be similar for you guys, is one, Chris Middleton living up to his new contract in a big way. I think there was a lot of concerns for some people heading into the season, how much further he could go after he got the All-Star nod last year, but the overall numbers, they were great, but they weren't like, wow, crazy, this guy's definitely a second star type material. I think everybody here, excuse me, agrees that he's a great second star for Giannis. And so to see him step up and really contribute and increase his numbers, get another All-Star nod, that was a huge plus. Dante, I'll leave that to you, Adam, but I was going to put Dante as another huge plus. And then, of course, having another year of Giannis, where not only does he, depending on how the season works out, look like he's on his track for a second straight MVP. He even took the ridiculous per game stats of last year and ratcheted up even that much further, which, we get into this situation where, could you imagine this guy playing even more minutes, what kind of output he would have, which is, it boggles the mind a little bit. So those are the 3 big things, where Chris being as good as he was, Giannis, of course, and then from the rest of the roster, I would say Dante was probably the biggest surprise out of all of them.
Yeah, what about you, Kyle?
I also had Dante as one of mine just because, obviously, I mean, he's the fact that he's not only healthy, but he did show, a lot of capabilities of being a great off-ball kind of player that could play off of Giannis and Chris and everyone else. I think that was a huge improvement. I think another thing I liked was that the players that came in have at the very least held their own. Like Wes Matthews has had defensively been really good, and offensively has a couple nights where he's shooting really well. And like I said, even if he's not shooting well offensively, he can still defend pretty well. George Hill coming back, and he was still a flamethrower from 3 and having that steadying presence as well. Robin Lopez, as much crap as I give him, he was at least a serviceable backup big that you can have on the team. I think of that second Philadelphia game, and when Brook got in foul trouble, he was substantial in limiting Embiid. So I think having those guys come in and still be able to play well enough to justify being on the team, and not necessarily completely replacing Malcolm Brogdon, but at least filling in the gaps that Brogdon might have left behind, was encouraging. And I think the other thing that I was really happy about was just the overall, like, how the team played. Obviously, it wasn't just a one-off fluke. It's been able to take it from the year prior and even take it to bigger numbers, and still having the ability to play the same way, still bludgeon teams to death, still shoot them out the gym, still have that capability, that it's not just a one-off season thing. It's kind of this is still something that's sustainable, at least for a regular season. Now, if it happens in the playoffs, maybe we'll find it out later today, maybe not. But at least we knew that, like, the system can work even with losing personnel or certain players not playing as well as it did the year prior.
Yeah, the system is an interesting point. To your earlier point, Riley, about I can't remember what I was wrong or what I even said about. I was looking back at the roundtables that we did to start the season, so I can think you'll be thankful to know that I have by far the worst take of all of those. So you're safe.
Oh, boy.
But in terms of the system, Riley, you had mentioned something about recalling Jason Kidd's system, trying to learn some lessons from that, and wondering if it was a 1 year blip or whatever. But clearly, that was like probably like you said, Kyle, like the system only was refined further this year. Like it wasn't really turned into a fraud or anything like that. The defensive system is still as amazing as it ever was. Offensively, obviously, some teams could find some flaws, but for the most part, and like you said, in the playoffs, we won't know if that'll eventually get exposed more. But to this point, I mean, that was really encouraging, is that Bud's defensive system was still, it only improved this year with the arrival of Robin Lopez and a couple other people.
Yeah, and I find that was going to be what I was wrong about, because, like you said, in the round table, I'm sure, and then throughout going into the season, my concern was, like, we had, not that the system either during Jason Kidd's time or this time was fluky per se, because obviously they worked for a reason. And my concern was, Jason Kidd did not want to adjust the system. Obviously, that eventually got him fired after like 7 more seasons of going through with the same exact system. But my concern was Budenholzer also has this propensity to not adjust all that quickly. He just kind of likes the system. And I was like, well, is that going to be taken advantage of again? So I think, we should, like you said, refine. Credit to Budenholzer and the players for refining it, and also credit to John Horst for being able to find guys to add in to, like you said, kind of reinforce it. And, it didn't help out super, or like it kind of broke down a little bit against the Raptors in the playoffs last year. But even then, I think a lot of the issues, at least in my point of view, was a lot of the offensive end. And so if you have a top league leading defense, that's going to get you probably all the way there, as long as the offense is passable. And for much of the season, we saw even on the other end as well, the offense, while not as strong as of late, was pretty deadly throughout the entire season.
Yeah, absolutely. So for my highlights, I was thinking a lot of mine came during the 18-game winning streak, which I almost like was kind of easy to forget about. And then I was like, oh yeah, for a while we just didn't expect the Bucks to lose a game at all, which was pretty incredible. I feel like we haven't experienced that I certainly haven't in my Bucks lifetime in a long time. But there were a couple games from within there. I just wanted, everyone will remember them, but like the 137-96 beatdown of Charlotte, followed by the 132-88 win against the Knicks. Those were back-to-back absolute destructions of Eastern Conference teams. If you want to feel bad for Charlotte fans, God, they shot 36.6% from the field in that one. That is tough to see. Well, anyway, those nearly like 50-point victories for the Bucks back-to-back was incredible. And during that streak, there was also the 119-91 waxing of the Los Angeles Clippers on ESPN on Friday night, that was just like incredible. I was so excited for that game. The Clippers had basically everyone, and like it just flabbergasted all the ESPN broadcasters. Like they didn't really have anything to talk about. And then there's that great shot of like Kawhi just looking despondent on the bench as the Bucks beat their brains in.
I don't think that's any different from how he usually looks, though.
That is true.
He kind of looks despondent in general.
That's a fair point. But those were, that 18-game winning streak was like probably one of the coolest parts of the season, obviously, by far, for myself and probably other Bucks fans.
Yeah, I think the Chris 50-point outing as well against Washington. That was a fun game just because it was zany and it was like this drag race between him and Bradley Beal to be like who can make more ridiculous shots as the game goes along, and the Bucks ended up winning, but that was a lot of fun too. That would add that to the highlights of the season. Kyle, do you have another signature game that jumps out to you?
I would say the first LA Laker game, because that one was also a nationally televised game. LeBron against Giannis, and Giannis hitting 5 threes. I don't think anyone would have saw coming. And when he did the prodding himself, that was just a good time. I think I remember I missed the initial game because I was watching Star Wars, and now I'm really pissed off about that. Looking back, but that rewatching the game and seeing the highlights and just seeing how Twitter that was probably, I would say, at its peak where everything was going well from end the season so far.
Yeah, I would agree. That was we had the wins over the Western Conference Elite. We were winning every single game possible. So the Eastern Conference didn't seem like they really had anyone who could even touch us. Obviously, that sort of started to flip when we lost once to the Lakers and then lost 3 games, I guess. And then all of a sudden we weren't on pace for 70 wins. So then we're vulnerable. Which
we ended up becoming the worst team in the league.
Yeah,
it happened that quickly.
But yeah, I mean, those were just those were incredible games. I missed the early part of the season just because I was getting married and stuff, and then on my honeymoon, so I couldn't see a lot of those games. But those sounded fun too. I mean, there was the win over Houston. Even in that first game of the season, I missed it. Obviously, I was. But it sounded really interesting. I mean, it's you go to first game of the season, you wind up winning the game, going to Brook down low on the block. Even small stuff like that is pretty fun to remember.
Yeah, there was the Giannis 50-point game against the Jazz, which I think was relatively early in the season too, which given the way that he plays, anytime he's able to get up to 50, because I think he had 52 last season.
Yeah,
was that
50,
against the Sixers? I can't remember who it was against, but anytime because of the way that he plays, if he's getting to 50, I mean, he shoots more threes now, so there's still a little bit of distance to it, but it's just going to be him yamming on dudes for 48 straight minutes, which is just, it's beautiful to watch when another team, especially one like the Jazz, where it's this whole Giannis stopper, Rudy Gobert thing, and it's just, I don't even know if Rudy played in that game, but when you play against certain opponents, and he's able to do what he does for that full 48, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, so obviously tons of highlights, but let's talk a little bit about if we have any lowlights from this season. Riley, let's start with you.
I would say, so I see that Teutonia World just hop in the live chat. I believe that Teutonia World, if there's a 10 things about the season that's disappointing, that's a pretty worthwhile video. You may or may not agree with all the things, but I think there's a lot of points in there to kind of be a started off point on this conversation. I would say the first thing, the main thing is this is the first season where it was we don't care about the regular season, and obviously there was this argument. We care about it because we've never won at this level before. To just enjoy all the winning, which is true. But after last season, where it was this breakout, wow, I can't believe we actually did what we did, became first seed. This looks like a team of destiny. And then coming into this season where you expect them to be great again. And the only question is, what are these kind of ancillary pieces? How do they fit? I think combined with that and the length of the season, all sorts of different things. I think the biggest downside to this year for me was the fact that it was the first time where we don't really care about the regular season, which made some weeks, some opponents a little more difficult to really care about or be as locked in, or you can kind of come and go to the season. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that narrative. It's just kind of the reality of being a fan of a really good NBA team these days.
Yeah, Kyle, what about you?
It kind of ties into it with the regular season not mattering. It also made Twitter more a pain in the ass to deal with. And thankfully, I didn't have to be on the Brew Hoop Twitter account as consistently this year. So that kind of made things a little bit easier where I could just step away as much as I could. But it was just more because the regular season didn't matter, we weren't sure if we were supposed to be happy with the team winning or be upset with the team winning. If the team lost, then do we freak out like we've always used to do and think the sky is falling? Or Do we try and brush it off and say, no, everything's fine because it doesn't matter? And then there's never a point where being in the middle was okay. Like, kind of like what you would say, Riley. Like, you can criticize the team how they did and still be a fan, but it felt like it was either nope, everything's fine, or nope, the sky's falling, and there was never an in between. And I think between that and just the general vibe of Twitter as well, it just seemed like there was a lot more, not necessarily infighting like it used to be with Bucks Twitter civil war, but it just seemed like it was always a new fight with a new fan base or a new person. It was James Harden, it was LeBron, it was ESPN, it was I'm trying to think, like Philly fans, and it became Boston fans, and it's Miami fans, and it just seemed like every time there's a new opponent that we were trying to battle, and it just got to the point where it's like, none of this shit matters at this point, so we just need to stop fighting. Like, the shit doesn't matter in the regular season, but at the same time, we care so much because if we lose, then we have to argue with this fan base. And I think that was my biggest low light, is just because, thankfully, I wasn't on Twitter as much this year, but it was still enough that it got to the point where, when my kid was born, I wasn't on Twitter that much, and that was nice. And now the season's over, there's not that much of that nonsense going on. So I think that's kind of been the nice thing, but it also reflects on how the regular season doesn't matter, because now we don't know how we should act. Because last year, yeah, the regular season might not have mattered, but at least we were winning, and that was a new feeling that most of us haven't had unless you were there in the 80s.
And if I can make one quick point, kind of piggybacking off of that, I've heard, not complaints, but when you the royal whoever brings up, well, like, Twitter's so toxic, and then somebody else says, well, you shouldn't be on Twitter then. But I think it's sort of a fallacy, because so much of, at least the way that I consume, or the way that most, I think, depending on your demographic, sports like consumption comes through, is via the lens of Twitter. And so that's where the conversation happens. That's where a lot of people are at. And yes, maybe it's like a small fragment of the fan base, but it's vocal, and it's the one that we happen to be in. So I know that's probably not super interesting for people who aren't into the social media, who generally just do like the commenting on Brew articles, for example, to talk about or hear about like Twitter drama. But at least for me, Kyle, when you were running the Brew Hoop accounts, Adam as well, you don't tweet all that often, but I know you're on there, so you see it at least. You just kind of, you're like a sponge, and it's just coming in, and because that's the way that we end up consuming the fandom, that's what makes it disheartening, the fact that you have all these kind of arguments, and makes it difficult to enjoy the season when you have all these other things going on, which maybe I shouldn't be on Twitter, but what are you going to do?
Well, it was easier when the team was struggling with Jason Kidd, because everyone had a common enemy at that point. And now that common enemy is gone, so now there's just multiple enemies. And I think that was the weird part with last year, is the team was still doing well. And I remember going on that rant, yelling at all the national media. And then I got ratioed, I got blown the fuck up about it. And then fast forward to the next year, and everyone that was saying the same shit I did the year before is now saying it now. It's like, you guys are a bunch of hypocrites. It's just also that. It's just kind of the hypocritical, everyone has to be right kind of mentality as well that I had an issue with.
Yeah, it's
might have to bleep some of those words, but it's fine.
Even in quarantine, I don't really have an appetite to go back and do that much production. So yeah. Teutonia World, obviously, with a low light, chimes in, very on brand. Chris not showing up against the Lakers to set months of LeBron MVP quarantine narrative. I gotta say that didn't click in my mind, but that's why we have other people, other perspectives, like we were talking about on Twitter. Yeah, I mean, you guys make really interesting points. I think it's a difficult. I mean, the thing about obviously Twitter is it's so instantaneous. You can move from one thing within the next like half hour. Some new thing can completely take over, and it's so easy to move from one thing to the other. So it's hard to take a broad perspective on stuff. I think it's hard for us to all kind of like grapple with this new reality that you were talking about, Riley, which is the idea that the regular season might not matter. I mean, for a lot of our lives, and I would say not necessarily the majority, but probably the majority of people who are like avid Bucks fans who are specifically on Twitter are younger. They're not going to know or remember a lot of any Bucks teams that have won this much. So they're kind of trying to figure out what it's like, to deal with a team that, when they're winning all this time, what happens when they lose? It's like when we talk about the Packers, like having a losing season or whatever, and your dad will chime in and be like, well, you weren't there for the 72 through 91 when they really sucked. I think we're always going to sort of have these squabbles. They'll always be there. I wish obviously that we would all be able to sort of just come together and not always feel like, oh, I got to be right about this, I got to be right about that. I'm happy to be wrong. Like I said, I'm going to tease it again. Terrible take about what I was expecting this season, and I'm always happy to be wrong. I don't care. Like, it's fine. I'm just trying to make my best educated guess, and if someone's wrong, hopefully try and be like, don't try and dunk on them. Just be like, oh man, they probably know that they're wrong. If they really dig in, then they're probably someone who you don't want to interact with that often. Then, it's just not quite as fun when people aren't willing to engage and accept the fact that sometimes they're wrong. But yeah,
I did have a player one that I was disappointed. Eric Bledsoe's play has been concerning. I think that's been the low light, just because maybe we thought he would at least be good in the regular season, and then what happens in the playoffs we don't know. But I feel like he's been underwhelming this regular season so far. I mean, he's had moments where he's been really, really great, but overall, I feel like when Giannis has good games, Chris has good games, Brooke has good games. Like, everyone else seems to have really, really good games, and I can't think of a notable Eric Bledsoe had a really good game this year, which I feel like is odd, because last year you can go back and you can look and it's like, all right, it was when he shut down James Harden twice in the year. It was when he single-handedly against Boston in one of the regular season, he scored like 8 straight points in the fourth quarter, or it was that Indiana series where he just was able to hit like 5 threes. But I feel like he hasn't had that this year. And every other player, I feel like, has had that one notable game. And maybe that's more of Bledsoe's consistency, for better or for worse. But I would say that would kind of be a low light, is the lack of heights that Eric Bledsoe has achieved this year.
If I was to jump on with two player lowlights, since we're ragging on players, I would say that 2-week stretch where I had to pretend that, along with everybody else, that Kyle Korver would be okay on defense to justify the fact that he was going to win us a playoff game or something like that. I thought that whole conversation was a little strange. Like, he looked good moving for like a guy his age, but he was still moving like a guy his age. And so I was a little skeptical about the 2-week stretch where it seemed like people thought he was going to become this, decent defender to get by in the playoffs. I don't think anybody has illusions about that anymore. And then the other one would be Brook Lopez forgetting how to shoot from 3. Now he's still shooting like 30%, but compared to last season's heights, to come down and there's just long stretches like, oh my God, it's just we're in the desert right now. We cannot make a 3 whatsoever. And it makes it worse. It's not his fault because he was so successful with it last year, but his shooting form, the way that he turns into a V mid-air while he's shooting it or whatever, like all that sort of disturbs me a little bit. So when the shots aren't going in, that's that much more frustrating. And then on top of that, we've talked about throughout the season, if between Eric and Brooke, if teams are like, well, we're just going to let them shoot 3s. Well, we didn't have a great track record so far this year to see that Brooke would be able to shoot out of it or actually make that defensive strategy pay. So that would be my 2-player lowlights.
I didn't have any player ones. I have just in generally any day game that we've had to sort of suffer through this year.
Yeah.
I would say the game in France was particularly not that delightful. Shout out to the Hornets fans. And then also, I know you mentioned it was a highlight, the Washington game, Riley. I felt a little different. So I felt like the first 3 quarters of that game were probably my least favorite Bucks basketball I had to watch all year. It was looked like a playground, had absolutely no flow. Is some of the most trash basketball I've seen in a long time.
Did you not watch the Charlotte game on the Sunday afternoon? Because that was the worst game.
that one's terrible. But there was at least that one's felt slow and awful. The Washington game just felt like it's like, in 4th grade when you would get be like, all right, let's just run it up and shoot really fast. And then you get turnovers back and forth. It's like you get one of those sequence where someone's they'll record the 30-second. It's like there's 4 turnovers in 30 seconds, and someone's like, "This is the worst basketball you'll see all year." That one was tough, but then like the fourth quarter and overtime of that game was a highlight for me because that was dope between Bradley Beal and Chris Middleton.
Yeah, it was simply because, and I think there was an article on ESPN about Chris talking about he's 0.2 percentage points away from a 50, 40, 90 season or whatever, which is super brutal if that's the case, if he's not able to get there. But he was talking about like, yeah, I went back and rewatched the Wizards game where I scored 50. So it was more so a highlight just to see Chris get his. And he was like, even when he was talking to us, like, yeah, I was impressed with how aggressive I was the entire game. I'm like, let's take that energy and let's do it for every game though, Chris. How about that? So I thought I just wanted to give him a shout because he was mentioning it, top of mind for him, and we're all thinking about Chris during quarantine right now. So
all right, well let's talk about we don't have to do like sort of specifics because we can't remember what we weren't smart enough to. I wasn't smart enough to go back and listen to our preseason prediction podcast and tell you guys what we said beforehand. But here's a couple things that went about as I expected. I looked at the Brew Hoop Roundtable. I guessed over on the win total. It looked like they were gonna, which was at 57.5, and it looked like the Bucks would probably hit that.
I said under. I remember that one.
uh-huh.
I had Dante as most improved, which wound up being good. I think a lot of other people probably predicted that too. Now here's the one that didn't go very well. It had Bucks non-Giannis MVP, and this is an example, kids, of where you try and zag a little too hard. And I put Robin Lopez.
Appropriate.
So just learn from my lessons, please, everyone, and never do something like that. So those were some of mine that I had personally.
I think I took the under, and my reasoning was like the team's not going to give a damn about the regular season, much like the rest of us. Even though they might not give that much of a damn, they're so good that it doesn't even matter. So wrong there. I think the only thing I was really correct about was guessing that Giannis would probably get a second MVP in a row. And we'll see, like Tony World said, depending on the quarantine talk. But I think ESPN also did like a media straw poll on Giannis won the MVP like going away. So I still think he'll probably end up grabbing it. And I think that was the only big thing. Otherwise, I don't know. I was not pessimistic, but I just didn't expect them to have as good of a regular season just because they had already proved what they were capable of. And I figured older roster, given the free agents they brought in, they want to obviously save Giannis and Chris as much as they can. So I just figured between all those, they wouldn't perform as well, but happy to be wrong, obviously.
Yeah, I know for sure I said they were going to get under the win total, but still easily get the first seed because I said the only team that would compete with them was Philly. And obviously Philly showed they were not the team that was going to compete with them. So I got half of it right where Milwaukee was going to comfortably have the 1 seed. I just thought it was going to be they get like 55 wins and just don't care about the rest of the season because they'd have the 1 seed locked up at this point by now. But the other thing I think I was off on, I think I said there was going to be 2 all defensive players, in which I thought Eric Bledsoe would repeat because it's kind of an honorary, tradition award. Like once you get it once, you get it again. I think he's going to get an all defensive team spot. And now I'm looking at maybe Brook getting it. And the more I think about it, I don't think Brook's going to get it either. So I was kind of off on that prediction as well. Those are the 2 that I was really, really off on, I think. Otherwise, I'm trying to remember what else we said, but I think those are the 2 that I just got horribly wrong.
I had 2 more. So one before the season, I don't think I like proclaimed it from the rooftops, but I thought for sure this is going to be the Sterling breakout season because we had seen at the end of last year into the playoffs is like, oh man, like he's still playing like Sterling does, but he's actually like scoring and stuff, which is helpful. So I figured maybe this would be the Sterling breakout season. Sadly, it looks like quite the opposite and probably Sterling's last season in Milwaukee, which is a real downer. The other one that really jumps out to me was, I think it was after like 3 weeks. Wes, it was against Orlando, on the road against Orlando. This was like the Dante Sterling breakout game. Wes wasn't playing well, and Dante and Sterling came in, gave him a lot of energy. They ended up winning the game. And I remember going into the rapid recap and declaring the first comment in the article, you probably find it as like Wes just lost his starting job. I was horribly wrong about that. Wes still retains his starting job, and he continues to play decently enough to, justify having that job. So that would be the other big thing. I I was big wrong, but at least I was really big about it. I didn't, there was no halfway about that. I thought for sure he had lost his starting job, but was wrong about that.
R.I.P. to Washed Watch. What a time that was.
After like 2 weeks, that was it. So good on the team for getting rid of that segment, I guess.
All right, guys. Last one here. What are you going to miss most about not being able to see play out? So, like, is there something in particular about this regular season that you're going to miss playing out down the stretch, whether it's a player or a narrative? I'll go first. Give you guys some time to think. So, I think you mentioned it earlier, but I think just seeing Chris Middleton like really start to get some all NBA buzz was actually like pretty interesting to me. Like seeing him like really come on this season with his contract. Obviously, it's a heck of a lot of money for a guy who I think we all had questions about before the start of the season. But there were a lot of articles coming out lately about him, about how well he was shooting. There a good one on 538. I was listening to Dunked On, and I mean, they had him in consideration for like third team all NBA. And that just wasn't something I even really thought about, to be honest, before the start of the season, was him probably being an all NBA player. Teutonia World obviously agrees clearly. But yeah, I don't know. So that was one I was looking forward to playing out because he'd had a good season so far.
I guess I would have liked to see how Bud would have see if you would tighten the rotation in terms of getting closer to the playoffs. Like instead of using 10 to 12 guys, maybe tries to reduce it to 8, and which of those guys off the bench you would bring. Obviously George Hill would have been one of them when healthy, but then it's kind of like, is he going to try and get Dante playoff minutes or not get him playoff minutes? Is Robin Lopez going to be a factor, or is it just going to be in case of emergency? Was he going to look at Pat Connaughton? Was Marvin Williams going to be a factor, or Ersan? Like, which of those two? So I guess that would have been the one thing I would have looked forward to seeing, is if Bud would have tried and get his rotation to be closer to what we'll see in the playoffs or not. Odds are he wouldn't. He would still go, 10, 11, 12 deep. But it would have been curious to see, like, if Eric Bledsoe's struggling, does he just pull him at the end of the game to let George Hill close the lineup? So I think that's what I would have. That's the only thing I'm really going to miss that I would have wanted to see play out this season.
Yeah, kind of hopping on the back of that, depending on how the NBA decides to resolve the season, whether it be do a couple of games and then go into the playoffs or jump right in the playoffs, a little concerned about the Marvin versus Ersan thing, because a lot of players have already said, like, if you're not out there, you'll kind of lose a little bit of the tendencies, a little bit of the flow that you have with your teammates. And so, Marvin, as a new addition, he's already had a couple of standout games, but now he's going into this lockdown. The entire team is, obviously, where he's not able to continue to work in game. And so if we come back and it's like, okay, we're just going to play 5 games, then go into the playoffs, or just go right into the playoffs, is that going to be a concern if we rely on him, or is it going to be like Bud's going to go right back and be like, okay, Ersan, you're back out there, Bud, get in there. We'll see how that works out, which would, that's a viable option given how reliable and how much Bud Budenholzer relies on Ersan. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. It would have been cool to see how much more comfortable he could get. The other thing I'm really going to miss, like 3 to 4 times a week, talking or seeing people talk about how Eric Bledsoe is supremely better than Malcolm Brogdon, and bringing it up months and months and months and months after the whole thing has been decided, and just still going after it. So I think I'm personally sad that I'm not going to see random, totally unsolicited tweets about how Eric Bledsoe scored 10 points this week and Malcolm Brogdon only scored 8. So those are the 2 things I'm going to miss with the regular season on hold.
Yep, we're all gonna miss that one, Riley. Okay, all right, guys. Let's take a quick ad break here, and on the other side of it, we are going to say who we would want from the 05-06 Milwaukee Bucks to be on this year's Milwaukee Bucks team. So you definitely want to stay tuned. Yeah. All right, see you in a second. Okay, we are back for the podcast listeners. For the live stream, we basically didn't leave. So, all right, guys. 05-06 Milwaukee Bucks. I chose this team not for any strategic reason, but because I just kept hitting back on Basketball Reference and came to a purple logo. So we are looking at the 05-06 Milwaukee Bucks. Riley, do you have any early leaders in the clubhouse for someone that you would want on this year's Milwaukee Bucks team? And don't forget, who are you going to kick off the team?
So I would say the two players that jump out, kind of looking at the roster here, and I would suggest everybody go to the Basketball Reference page. Just go down to the per game numbers, just because that's back in the Dizzy. That's what the numbers were all about. Were per game, no per 36, whatever, 15 years ago. Michael Redd shooting almost 40% from three. Was that the season where he got an All-Star nod? I can't remember. 03-04 would have been his. So, but still, I mean, he was still obviously the guy for the team. So I would say either him, or if we're doing youth movement, we want to build for the future. I don't know if you could go back in time and mold Andrew Bogut into a 3-point shooter. If you could like put him in the lab a la Brook Lopez and make it happen. But I think rookie Andrew Bogut, I'm not sure if I would say he was a dynamo per se, because his numbers weren't super popping off the screen. But if you're looking like we're a little tight, cap flexibility, we're looking for a young guy who we can mold, I think Andrew Bogut, those two, I mean, it's a little reductive since they're two of the more better known names, but those are the two I pick off the top of it. And then for who I'd kick off, obviously I would cut Robin Lopez in a second for Andrew Bogut. And then for Michael Redd, how tall was Michael Redd? Let's see if he could replace Wes. 6'6". Yeah, he might be able to replace Wes. So maybe I'm kicking Wes off the team to get Michael Redd in there.
All right, who you got, Kyle?
So I thought about it, and yeah, so there's rookie year Andrew Bogut, which is a considered person. Michael Redd was probably the strongest one. I also saw Jamal McGlure, who at this point had 5 years in the league. And I would possibly lean towards him just because he was a big body, and I think he would just be a non-shooting version of Robin Lopez. I don't know. It would be interesting to see how he would do against like an Al Horford, because when I look at Jamal McGlure, like the first person I thought of was Al Horford, except without shooting. So I would probably go with him or Michael Redd. I think it's just more because with Michael Redd shooting, that would have been very helpful, especially and I think that at this point, he probably would have been a starter. Like, I don't think he'd be coming off the bench. Like, he would be the guy shooting. I mean, he scored like 25 points a game or something. Like, he was definitely the main focus. I'm also upset because I think TJ Ford, I don't know if this was right before the injury. This was right after his spine injuries. But he came back and still had like 12 points and 6 assists. But he was not the same player he was his rookie year, which is unfortunate. So I think I'd also stick with Michael Redd, but I really thought Jamal McGlure for a hot second just because him just banging bodies with Embiid and Horford would have been kind of hilarious. And if I had to get rid of someone for Michael Redd, I'd probably go Pat Connaughton, because then you can move West to a 6-man role and Michael Redd would move into the starting lineup. Still a lot of questions defensively, but that would just be another good shooter. And also, what would we do about the number? Because they both, him and Milton, have the same number. So who leaves? Who leaves town for that number would be an interesting dynamic as well.
I like the McGlure take. Let's see. I was a big I always liked Tony Kukoc.
I was gonna say, who's gonna go for old man Tony Kukoc? This is the swan song season for him.
Yeah, now let us remember we have to take him in this season. We are getting 37-year-old Tony Kukoc.
Yeah.
30.6% from three on 2.3 attempts. So it's not exactly amazing. Arms are barely working, but he's still creaking around. Okay. Averaged 15.7 minutes per game in 65 games. I could see, if I want to get him on there, get a little veteran leadership a la Pau Gasol. Obviously, that worked out well for the Bucks last year.
Yeah,
I could see Kukoc, and I would consider kicking off DJ Wilson, if only to see what Kukoc could bring me in the end. Probably not, but he's someone I would consider. A yikes for Kukoc, 38.9% overall from the field. Not the best.
That's not great. That effective field goal percentage, not going to be great either. Here's the thing about Tony Kukoc,
what's weird though? Jamal McGlure made an all-star team.
That is true.
For a lot of these guys, we're thinking yeah, you're bringing him forward. He's 37. Clearly, I mean, literally at the tail end of his career. Let Suki Hobson have a weekend with him. Just, I don't even know what sort of balance beam exercises, whatever program they have going on, and you might get that 37 you might be able to slash it down to like 25-year-old Tony Kukoc over like the course of a weekend. So that's something we have to consider when thinking about bringing him forward.
So the only other guy I was thinking about was Bobby Simmons. And I can't recall Bobby Simmons' game that well, unfortunately. I wish I could. I was just looking at his like percentage of field goals by distance. You know, he shot 42% from three on 3.3 attempts, which is pretty solid. I can't remember if that's like if you look at his career average or whatever, I'm looking at it right now. He was 39.6% from three, so that's not bad. He would probably be kind of a tweener. I can't remember how he did defensively, but he would be the only other guy that I would consider taking outside of like obviously Michael Redd. But I could potentially see Bobby Simmons as like a slightly smaller maybe Urson or Wilson replacement if I decide to take Simmons over Kukoc for that slot.
I would have to like remember, but I feel like I would have to watch old highlights. He kind of reminds me of Rodney Hood in terms of style of play. Like he's kind of tall and somewhat skinny, but he's not like thin as a rail, but he's not like bulky. He kind of looked like he came into. I think I remember that year he came into the team like a little overweight, and I could be completely off. And this is like 13-year-old me misconstruing everything, but I feel like he was just like slightly overweight. He was supposed to be like. He was the most improved player the year prior. I remember that because when the Bucks got him, I was like, oh, okay, cool. They got this guy, the most improved player, and then they ended up spending too much money for him, like everything that happened with the Milwaukee Bucks around that time. But I would say like Rodney Hood is like the best comparison in terms of like a small forward that kind of had a smooth jumper that lived more in that mid-range 3-point area. Like he can shoot off the dribble. So he'd be interesting, but I don't know why. I feel like he came into camp like slightly overweight or something, and again, maybe because he just wasn't as good as his salary was. And it's just like the problem with the mid $2,000 is everything I'm gonna look at is from my own like teenage eyes, which is not a good indication at all for anything in terms of evaluating talent.
I think we should also give a shout out to Charlie Bell coming in from overseas, 3 seasons in Italy and Spain, and then for whatever reason the Bucks were the team that took a chance on him and brought him back stateside. And I think in the 2005-2006 he didn't necessarily break through. I think he played like 60 games, but he ended up starting quite a bit of in the next season in 06-07. So shout out to Charlie Bell as well.
Yeah, and Tony World mentioned
that's the other guy that got a contract that. Yeah.
Tony World mentioned Simmons sort of bulky all around, sort like a poor man's shorter Lamar Odom, sort of a contract year guy. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So just
actually, that's probably a better comparison.
The couple other players that we didn't mention that were under, I don't know if they were under consideration, but they were on this team. Mo Williams, Joe Smith, old Joe Smith. Jerry Welsh, Dan Gadzarich, of course, Jermaine Jackson, Reese Gaines, Irvin Johnson, not the one you're thinking of, and Josh Davis. So, yeah, I don't know about any of those guys. The only guy I even remember, like, remotely for me is, besides Gadzarich, just like Joe Smith. I remember that year Joe Smith came in, and I was kind of excited for that, which is sad in retrospect.
I feel like Mo wouldn't have been bad. Because he would have been like a decent guard off the bench, like a decent point guard. Like Mo Williams wouldn't have been a bad option either.
Do you guys think so obviously everybody knows about Irvin Magic Johnson. When's the 30 for 30 coming out on the other Irvin Johnson though? Like to talk about like what's the opposite of Magic? Just like real Johnson or just Johnson? I don't know what his nickname could be, but I think we need to probably start putting together a 30 for 30 for that guy for living in the shadow of one of the greatest players in NBA history.
But man, was he a good contributor for that 2000-2001 Bucks team.
That's gonna be the high. That's gonna be apex.
Center, like him and Scotty Williams was a front court that you did not want to mess with.
Speaking of players from back in the day, this will be in the Monday morning media roundup. Scott Williams went in on David Stern this week on Twitter. So like Giannis, I don't even know what Giannis is tweeting about, but then Scott Williams got in the mentions, like in the replies. He was like, he tweeted at Giannis. It must have been from the 0-1 playoffs. And he was like, "Here, watch your coach at 3:34 or whatever." And it's like a confrontation with Iverson, I think. And then he went in. He's like, "David Stern, if he didn't take us out, we would have won the title. We had beaten we were like 8-2 against Western Conference teams or whatever." Like that, he went into all these sorts of different, not conspiracy theories per se, but he was going at the league in general. So shout out to Scott Williams as well. He's a hell of a guy, and he was coach, right? Of course he was for a little bit there. I remember him. He seemed like a really nice guy in like all the interviews. So shout out to him too.
Yeah, I'm sure it was an assistant coach like Giannis's rookie year. Like him and Nick Van Exel were like two former players that were like assistant coaches during Giannis's early stages.
Yeah, Giannis really liked Nick. It's like Nick iced coffee Van Exel.
Yeah. every time I think of Nick Van Exel, I hear your voice saying Nick's iced coffee Van Exel. In my mind, it's inextricably linked at this point for me.
All right. Well, that was a fun exercise. Boy, these teams are fun to go back to. Okay, let's move on.
Like that's the shocking part.
Oh yeah, that's right. What were we saying, Riley? They were 40-42, but they were 5th in the Central Division still.
Yeah, they were. I had it brought up. Let me see if I can find where it is. Yeah, they were 5th, and I believe the Pistons led, and it kind of went from like there to Indiana. It might have been then Chicago, Cleveland, then us. I can't remember. But if you look at the East,
Pistons were so good. Cleveland had LeBron.
Yep.
And then Indiana was just it was really close though. I think Indiana and Chicago weren't that much ahead of the Bucks. Like the Pistons were by far the best team in the East that year.
Yeah, they it was tough to have that. I mean, 40-42, that'd get you like a 6th seed in this day and age. So I didn't even look to see if they made the playoffs. I can't imagine, given the 5 teams in that division alone, and I think there was a couple other in the other divisions that played pretty well. But to do so well and not make it's somewhat disappointing. I suppose
They lost Eastern Conference first round.
Oh, okay.
Versus the Pistons.
4 gentlemen
4-1. Yeah. Not
I
bad.
remember
Well,
shout out the analysts. All the analysts.
They had shout out Terry Stotts, man.
Yeah, Terry Stotts.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember if did Terry Stotts get canned and then immediately go to Portland, or was he kind of off in the other for a little bit before he went to Portland? I can't even remember.
Let's see. I'm with his bot. He was in it. He went to Dallas as an assistant coach for like 4 years, and then went to Portland. So he had a few years in the wilderness as an assistant.
Yeah. 0506, top of the world, baby.
Wow. All right. Well, let's move on to our potpourri segment. Riley, you wrote the rapid fire questions this week, so we'll let you take it away.
Okay. So just a couple of quick ones, as they always are. I forgot to finish that one. So first question, in your guys' opinion, does the long break help or hurt the Bucks?
I say hurt.
Yeah, same. I say hurt.
Okay. Breakfast meal of choice, weekday, or you could either do weekday or weekend. So let's say, what's your breakfast during a work week? What do you normally go for? And then weekend, you have a little bit more time. What's your go-to breakfast then?
Okay, so for weekdays, I normally do like overnight oats. I take like quick oats and old-fashioned oats, soak it in milk along with like peanut butter, banana, cinnamon, put in like some Tupperware, let it sit overnight. So that way like the oats absorb the milk. And then that way the next morning I can just grab it out the fridge and then I can eat it cold. So I have that and then like toast, like just peanut butter toast or just like regular toast. So that's my weekday. And then weekend, I try and do something involving eggs, like whether it's like a scrambler or an omelet or just like a bunch of scrambled eggs. Like try and do something more because I actually have the time to like make the breakfast, eat, and then do dishes after it. So those are my breakfast plans, especially with this quarantine. It's been kind of nice that I can actually stay home and make breakfast.
During the week, I'm not really a breakfast guy, so like during the week I don't eat breakfast. I just wait till lunch, and I like don't eat a very big lunch either. I'm like a guy who like I basically save all my calories for a night and then have a giant dinner. Work just works for me. On the weekends, I might have like a bagel, or I would get like we used to get a cinnamon roll back when I could walk outside.
in the before plague era.
So I've made a cinnamon roll. I'll have that with coffee, but I usually just keep it pretty light. I'm just never been a big breakfast guy at home.
Okay. Who will have more minutes for the Bucks next season, DJ or Thanasis? And I should say, I usually do these with the numbers. I believe DJ has 280 some minutes and Thanasis only has 90 some minutes this season. But going into next year, who would you say between those two? Since we've seen apparently Bud wave the white flag on DJ, assuming that's going to be the same case next season, who would you say? He might still give it a try again, but who knows?
I'd say DJ just more on the account that Ersan and Marvin Williams might not be on the roster next year. So at some point, there's going to have to be a backup four, and DJ Wells will stumble in for like a 1 week stretch. I also don't know. Actually, I'm changing it to Thanasis. I can't guarantee DJ will be on the roster next year.
That's the other thing to keep in mind. Yeah.
I was like, no, DJ might not be on the roster next year, so I'll go Thanasis.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. I kind of think it'll be Thanasis too. I kind of feel like just given the like the salary cap kind of being up in the air, I have a bad feeling it might even like lower from what it is if things go really badly. And Thanasis' contract isn't great because but DJ's contract getting guaranteed is not great either. I kind of feel like we might try and do like a little salary dump there.
Yeah, I think you guys are probably right. So two more here. One, would you be able to name the last season that Giannis played in a game, but he did not start? I'm not looking for the specific game. That's a lot to go into, but would you be able to guess which season it was?
Probably his rookie year, so the 13-14 season.
Okay.
I'm going to guess it's the 14-15 because I think there was a stupid stretch where Kidd said, I'm going to have him come off the bench. And he had there was 10 games or whatever where he's like, have him come off the bench. And he started to play better. And he's like, worked his way back into the starting lineup. Stupid freaking guy. Jesus Christ. Oh, my God.
I thought he did that with Middleton. I don't remember if he did that with Giannis or not, but it could be.
So that was actually, both of you were incorrect, but not by too far. 15-16 was the last season. It was December 15th or 16th, I should say, 2015 against the Clippers. It was a 103-90 loss for the 10-17 Bucks at that point. Giannis ended up playing 33 minutes, 4-12 from the field. He actually made a three-pointer. That was probably a fluke. Ended up with 9 points, 11 rebounds, 2 assists, and 3 turnovers, and 4 fouls. So I didn't really look into why Giannis was coming off the bench. I'm assuming it was another thing where he got in some sort of altercation and Jason Kidd was trying to prove a point. But that was the last time Giannis played in the game and was not a starter, from what I could gather. And then the final one, favorite ice cream flavor.
Oh. I like confetti cake, the one with the chunks of birthday cake batter in it and sprinkles and frosting. Yeah, that's mine.
Good.
I'd go Ben & Jerry's strawberry cheesecake.
Ben & Jerry's is pretty strong. They always have some zany stuff going on. I like a classic mint chocolate chip. Give me a mint chocolate chip and I'm there for it. It's tough to mess that up, though I have found places that have done it. So that's what I got. That's my rapid fire this week.
Thanks, Riley. That was good. All right, Kyle, you got a film review all ready for us.
I do. It's the new trend. It's the hit thing. It's the crazy, wild stuff that's going on in the world. Obviously, I'm talking about Tiger King, which, for those of you that don't know, it's on Netflix. It's a document. It's like a 7-episode documentary about Joe Exotic, who had a zoo over in Oklahoma with all of these tigers and big cats and wild animals. And it's pretty much just detailing the story of how he rose to fame and his beef with one particular person, Carol Baskin, and how she was kind of the rescue side of it. And yet both sides are like, they're pretty smart in how they're doing it, but they're also completely hypocritical and shitty people. And I'm only 2 episodes in, and it's one of those where it's not good. It's not like Making a Murder where it was kind of like captivating, like ooh, I wonder what happened. It's just more of a, I don't know what the hell is going on, but I need to keep watching to figure out more of what the hell goes on. And then you kind of watch more of it, and you're like, why am I watching this? But yet the next episode, like I finished episode 2, and I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous because the first episode is all about Dozonic. And they're talking about this other dude who ended up having like 8 wives, and then this dude in Miami that like was trying to emulate Scarface, and then comes out and he has his own zoo. And then at the end, they're like, "Oh yeah, Carol Baskin's wife killed her husband." They're like, "Wait, what? Hold on, wait, what do you mean she killed her husband?" And then the episode ends. So it's just stuff like that where you're kind of sitting here like, what am I watching? And it's kind of this big thing. Like, if you see Joe Exotic, it's like the most stereotypical redneck you can ever picture. But he's also gay. So then it's kind of like, okay, he's a gay redneck. And especially in his upbringing, I probably wasn't, no one was really happy about that. And yet he has 2 husbands himself. And it's just like, there's just a lot of twists and turns. And you're kind of just sitting there going, what the hell am I watching, and why do I need to watch the next episode? And that is, and like I said, if you've heard about it, it's not good. It is not a good documentary. It's not like well done. It's one of those where it's kind of, someone said it's like a train wreck, and like as you just want to continue watching more and more of the wreckage happen. And I would say that is a spot on analysis. It's kind of one of those, this is the weirdest I've ever seen, to this is everything. Every time you just sit there like, what the hell's going on? And that is my film review. I'm only 2 episodes in yet. At the end of the second episode, I should watch the third, but I also need to like watch something coherent and cleanse my palate again.
Quick take out of 10 for the first 2 episodes. What would you give it so far?
It's tough because it's not good. In terms of entertainment, it is definitely a 9 or a 10.
Okay.
It is something that you want to continue watching, or you feel like you have to watch the next one to see what happens next. This I thought it was going to be overrated because there's nothing else going on in the world and we're all stuck inside, and this was just one of those stupid things that everyone's just decided we're going to watch. I think this would be something that everyone would watch regardless of if we were quarantined or not. So in terms of entertainment, it is like a 9 or a 10 just because you do want to keep seeing what the hell happens next. But in terms of overall, I give it like a 6 because it's not good. It's not like a good documentary. It's just a very entertaining documentary.
Good.
Wow.
Great.
When you finish,
Yeah, it's wild.
after you said all that stuff, and then you ended it with, yeah, so I've seen 2 episodes. I was like, what? Oh my God, that's so much
There's
stuff.
so much that happens, and there's so much that you have to remember, and that's only 2 episodes. And again, they ended the second episode saying, oh yeah, the opposition killed her husband. And you're just like, but she had, wait, her old husband? But she has this new guy. Obviously, she has a husband. So, like, what's going on here? Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. I don't know. Like I said, I feel like if we weren't quarantined, we'd still be talking about Tiger King because it is. It's just there are characters on that. There are characters.
Waiting for the first NBA player to do a Tiger King theme related like celebration after making a 3 or something. So hopefully the Bucks will be.
Someone's going to be. There's going to be a lot of Joe Exotic costumes this coming Halloween.
I was going to say.
I can guarantee that.
Russell Westbrook sees
that and Mandalorian / Baby Yoda. Like those are going to be the 2 main Halloween costumes.
Book it.
It's a great call. All right. So the next segment, Riley, do you have a fountain pen review for us?
So I didn't prepare anything at all this week, but I do have a fountain pen, so we can look at it. You probably won't be able to see it as well because the lighting's not great. So this week I have my Pilot Vanishing Point. So it's a little, you can't really see it all that well. The way that it works is it's built so that the clip is at the top here. And contrary to most fountain pens, it has a knock mechanism. So you'll think of most pens, they have a knock on the back end where you press it in. Really rare. It's hard to manufacture that and engineer it for a fountain pen just because of the size of the nib. So you'll see. Let's see. Yeah. So you can click it on. You'll notice that the nib is really, really small compared to your normal fountain pen. I don't have one to compare it to. This is a medium-sized nib. And what's extra special about this is not only that it's portable, the knock mechanism, the engineering, but also the nib is it's plated in 14 karat gold, which helps it run even smoother. So this is a slightly more expensive pen than your average like steel nib. It's still not super duper crazy, but if you're looking for a really unique in the world of fountain pens pen, one that you don't have to pop the top off or twist the turn off, you just knock it, you're good to go. The Pilot's Vanishing Point is the one to go for, and Pilot is one of the big Japanese brands, so they have really good nibs. The nib itself, even if it's a medium, they generally run a little bit thinner. So highly recommended, as thankfully all my purchases so far for fountain pens. So if you're looking for something a little different, the Pilot Vanishing Point is my suggestion.
Wow. I like these because I know nothing about fountain pens, and your knowledge is so extensive and comprehensive. It's fun.
It goes really, really
I
deep.
honestly thought it was just like a pen.
Yeah,
I did not think it was like anything more detailed.
Well, I mean, so the thing is, when you spend the kind of money that you spend on a stupid pen, I mean, the community itself is really quite deep. Like, there's a lot of people, and so there's a lot of information. And the other thing you have to get into, which we can in the future, it's not even just the pens; it's all the ink you can get to. That's why people like it, because there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. There's types that are like permanent inks, whatever color you could imagine. Some of them have shimmer where they put like little flakes in them, and when you write it out, you'll be able to see against the light, like they'll sparkle a little bit. So I think in this one I have Robert Oster Aquamarine, and Robert Oster is a Australian brand as well. So it's a global community. We can go into my inks in the future. I have a whole bunch of those too. So this thing will be riding through this whole corner.
You have to start talking about the ink.
Yeah, that's half the fun, is having all the different inks, which, I mean, again, this is totally 80-year-old fun because I'm talking about pens and inks, but what are you going to do about it? So that's what I got this week.
Wow. Well, Damon Bradley, fountain pen community, he's in. To Tony, we should put some classical music over this. When I'm stop being so lazy with production, I'll try and do something like that. And for any podcast listeners, I wish you could have seen the great smile and just sheer look of joy on Riley's face when he mentioned I can start talking about the ink. It was really priceless.
It's because it's really ridiculous. I'm smiling to hide the pain from how ridiculous it all is, but too deep into it at this point. So what are you gonna do?
Oh, all right, guys.
You have your fountain pens. I have my Animal Crossing, so it's all good.
Everything's all good. Amen.
All right, guys, it's time for weekly predictions. Okay. So
I'm still on the last week. I don't know.
This week, obviously, we're still using NBA Game Sim, the preeminent game simulator on the website, on the internet. So the games this week are at Dallas, that would be played today. And then there was a game at home against Toronto, and then the week ended with a game at Toronto. So I'm kind of sad because this would have actually been a dope week of basketball. But let's go through your predictions, guys. What do you think the Bucks are going to do this week?
So because they fell flat on their face last week, and they got decimated by the Pistons, and it was our narrative going after last week was that the Bucks were in free fall. That was what the narrative was. So I think they're going to go 3-0. They're going to shut the haters up again. They're going to turn the ship around. This is going to be a perfect week for them, is my guess.
I'm going 1-2. They once again fall to Dallas. Dallas shoots, I'd say 45% from three. They beat Toronto at home, which was helpful, but then they lose at Toronto. The crowd was too much. Chris Middleton struggles. Eric Bledsoe non-existent. The team they're stumbling to the finish line is what's happening. That is the narrative. The team is stumbling to the finish line. They get the marquee wins at home, but they can't do anything on the road.
I'm going to agree almost entirely with Kyle. I totally agree. 1-2. They're going to lose this Dallas game. They're going to just win the home game, lose at Toronto. And for anyone who wasn't listening and is listening this week, just so you know, as a reminder of Riley's statement, last week in game simulating the Bucks, they lost to the Pistons, a surprising loss by like 20 points. It was a tough one. They beat Houston.
Free throw controversy.
Yes, agreed. They beat Houston, and then they also lost to Washington. So like Riley said, season it's on the brink. As we discussed earlier, any loss is a lot. So, all right, I've simulated these games. I haven't seen the score, so I'm going to click through. First one, at the Mavericks, the final score is, whoa! Bucks 125 to Mavericks 103.
Let's go.
I was not expecting that.
All right.
Wow. Okay, here, I'll give you guys a few player stats. Okay. Oh, Chris Middleton finally bounces back. He had a really bad week last week. Simulating. He really sucked. So it's fitting that Teutonian World you're on watching live stream for this. Chris Middleton, 28 points, 11 of 20 from the field, 4 of 10 from 3. It seems like he came out aggressive. He probably was watching that Wizards tape, played like that. Giannis, 24 points. Eric Bledsoe, 17 points.
Okay.
Big three came through.
Wow. And Urson, 15 points as well. That's huge. Okay. And then, Luka and Kristaps combined for 58. So they kind of got theirs. But then the Bucks, Luka shot 11 of 27 from the field. So really inefficient scoring.
Okay.
That's a big win for the Bucks. Held the Mavs to 38.1 shooting overall. 25% from 3, 10 of 40 for the Mavericks. So
Bucks defended 10 of those 3-pointers. That was all luck. They only defended 10 of those 3-pointers. Everything else is just misses.
All right, so off to a great start. Not what I expected. Okay. This is at home against Toronto. Let's see. Oh, 119-91 Bucks victory.
Yes, okay. I told you guys. So now ESPN's sweating. They're sweating a little bit. There's a single bead of sweat on the forehead coming down. They're not too, it's not too crazy yet, but 2 wins in a row and against the Raptors too. That's tough for them.
Okay. All right. And then this last one at Toronto. Let's see.
Come on.
Okay.
Let's turn the ship around.
Okay, hold on. All right.
I'm nervous. My hands are sweating.
I'm already wrong with the prediction this week, so anything is a bonus at this point.
What the heck? Okay. All right, hold on. My simulation went whack. Okay, hold on.
It couldn't handle a 2-game Bucks winning streak.
All right, hold on. Okay. Here we go. Wow. 144-123 Bucks victory.
Yes. That is 144.
Wow. Giannis has 37, Bledsoe 22, Chris 18, Robin Lopez, like I always knew, my guy, 14 points. Okay. All right, that's pretty solid. Now, here's the thing about the Raptors. They had what the heck? Where's Kyle Lowry? Okay. So for the Raptors, Kyle Lowry shot 7 shots, had 8 points. Serge Ibaka led with 26 points, which I wasn't expecting. 9 of 13 from the field. Terrence Davis, 19 points. So Serge Ibaka and Terrence Davis are the Raptors' leading scorers. Wow, what an odd result. I wasn't expecting that. So perfect week for the Bucks, 3-0. So all right, guys, give us your narratives.
So after this 3-0 week, Giannis has been decent. It really depends on what the Lakers did as well. But I think ideally we've kind of, this is the moment where we have the redemption, right? We've had these 2-3 weeks of LeBron. He's surging. How can you deny this guy? He's amazing. Then the Bucks, they put their foot down, get these 3 in a row against top tier competition in both conferences. And now we're starting to move it back the other direction. People are like, well, when you look at the body of work, Giannis, really, you have to give it to him. This is the moment where the MVP is won, I think.
Kyle, you thinking the same?
All right. I would say the narrative is not necessarily Giannis focused, but on the team, because it was that free fall. Everyone's like, are they really going to be a legit number 1? And can they get knocked out in the second round? 2, maybe it's Philly, maybe it's Miami. We don't know. But at this point, with all the other teams and how they're playing, Milwaukee solidifies the number 1 seed, knocks Toronto for the 2nd seed down to 3rd seed. He creates them down in Toronto's eyes while Boston climbs up to number 2. Meanwhile, Philly somewhat gets their shit together, climbs up to the 4th seed, and then Miami goes down to 5, and Indy's still at 6. So it creates a lot of uncertainty. So the narrative is going to be Milwaukee solidifies its position as the Eastern Conference favorite, but Philly starts to get a little bit revived. Ben Simmons comes back, and now Philly is back to being the team that everyone thought they would be. So it's not necessarily going to be built around Milwaukee. Everyone's just like, okay, this team is good. Like, we realize they just had a bad week. But then it's going to be the other team's narratives. Toronto's in a free fall. Boston is going to be the new favorite in everyone's mind. And then you got Philly. Philly's threatening. They're coming back. And then they're going to suffer some humiliating losses on the road next week.
Kyle, I love it. You sound just like the national media. The Bucks get pushed to the back of the line. They're just good. There's not much to talk about, but we need to talk about Boston. We need to talk about the Raptors. Oh, God, that was good.
We all know this is about Boston and Philly. That's all this is going to be this week.
Yeah,
Toronto loses twice. It's not any indication about the Bucks. It's about Philly.
Oh, God. Wow. Well,
and I
really,
agree, Antonio. Well, it is a sad reality.
Yeah. Well, that was fun. Good thing for the Bucks going 3-0.
Yeah.
That was a great week for them.
We sound insane. We sound like crazy people. Just living our own.
And yeah, it's reality. It's not that we're crazy. This is just the world we live in.
Here's what we need to do. I know we're hurting right now for a little bit of content on the site. We'll just keep going, like the pregame post, the rapid recap, and then the next day, the post game the next day. We'll just keep it going. It'll be fine. No problem.
God. Well, as a reminder, on Sunday, the Bucks, you won't, any podcast listener, this will have already happened, but there's a Twitch tournament with Dante DiVincenzo, DJ Wilson, and Cam Reynolds playing against a couple members of the Mavericks, Bucks, and they're playing like NBA 2K20 or something. Mm-hmm. So clearly the Bucks are also hurting for content. Maybe we'll recap that next week, because I had hoped to do an ongoing segment of Dante's Inferno of what he's up to, but he has no social media. For some reasons that are, if anyone remembers, probably pretty valid based on some of his past tweets that came out slowly after the NCAA championship game. Mm-hmm. But so he's sort of off the grid, but we have a little bit on the grid, Dante. So I, for one, cannot imagine myself watching that, but I will comb through it.
I'm not going to watch it, but I will watch highlights.
Yes. So I will comb through it to see what Dante says, if he says anything illuminating. We'll have that on the podcast next week. But yeah, I don't know. Anything you guys want to say before I do my real quick social distancing plug?
Not off the top of my head. Kyle, do you have anything? I have a random stat that didn't find a place to fit in the podcast, but I can bring that up right now.
I was going to say, I will have a new series to work on. I'm not going to give too much details. It's just going to cover some Bucks moments in the past, and I'm going to travel back in time and fix everything or change everything. So the first one's going to be one that I personally remember and felt, and I think a lot of people will feel the same. So that's all I'm going to say. It should come out at some point this week, whenever I have the motivation and non-writer's block to finish it.
My random stat this week was the Bucks as a team made 893 threes and took 2,510 threes so far this season. Opponents against the Bucks have made 892 threes and taken 2,509 threes. So the opponents have literally taken and made one less three against the Bucks throughout the entire season, which is super arbitrary, means absolutely nothing, but there it is. So that's my stat this week. That's my plug.
Thank you, Riley. We commend you for your stat service. All right. So my quick social distancing plug. I know it's like hard to deal with everything that's going on in the world right now. Just please do your best to do social distancing. My wife is a nurse practitioner, as I said last week, in the medical ICU at one of the biggest hospitals here in Philadelphia. She is on the front lines of this. She's getting her first COVID patients this past week. Heard some of the stories. They're not dissimilar to what you're hearing in the national media about what's going to be going on at hospitals. It's really important, just not for the people in your life that could be affected by this. There's young people getting affected by it. But it's also really important for the healthcare people. It's really difficult, and they're going to be dealing with it for probably a long time. So please do your best to help out however you can, whether it's social distancing or if you see your local hospital is in need of masks and you have the capabilities to donate masks, create masks, whatever it is that they might need. I would urge you to look into that. If you know someone in your life who is not social distancing, please try and talk with them if you feel very strongly about it. I know I personally do. But please try and talk with them, maybe see if you can change their mind and convince them that this is something that is going to impact them. So That's just all I have to say about that. So, but we hope that we were able to provide a really good distraction for you for this quarantining time, for this last hour and 15 minutes or whatever. Really appreciate you listening. I know it's one of my favorite parts of the week is just getting a chance to, shoot the shit with these guys. And it's really fun. If, tell your friends, if you want to convince them to go watch the live stream, we'll do it Sunday mornings. Go to brewhoop.com, follow us on Twitter at brewhoop. We'll try and do a better job, me personally, of broadcasting the fact that we're going to be broadcasting it on Sunday mornings.
I'll try and have better internet.
Yes, Kyle will work to have better internet. And we will talk to you guys again soon. Thank you again for listening.